To improve the wall and the brick, what I've done is taken the larger scale brick and basically scaled it in half, and then mirrored it over, or well, created a copy and dragged it to the side. Also, because the bottom was pretty much along with one of the lines, I was just able to drag it up a little bit higher and create it and make it so it was seamless. So that way we have some smaller bricks. But what I'm doing right now is I've got the quick selection tool in use, and just going around and with the smaller brick layer selected, just creating a selection to conform to some of the shapes of the bricks. And what you can do is hold down Alt to deselect if needed, and then the normal selection, which would be the positive. But a quick and easy thing you can do to create a mask is, after you've made your selection, is select the layer and then click on the mask, and it's automatically going to take that selection and create a mask from it, which is pretty nice. Now, if you need to modify the selection a little further, I'm going to go ahead and undo that, right click, and use the Refine Edge. So this way what we can do is increase the contrast, adjust smoothing or feathering of the selection. We can contract, expand, a couple of different options. You can change your viewing mode, what it's going to look like in relation to the rest of this overall texture and the different layers. So that's a pretty cool thing you can do. And I do want kind of an opposite of that, so we can select the mask, and I'm going to turn off that link, but selecting the mask, Control I, which is going to invert it, and then we can start to see those different levels of brick showing. You may also notice I made some modifications to the coloration, and what I did was go to the main wall overlay and added in two additional effects: inner shadow, which is very subtle, and then drop shadow. So we take a look. I just have a linear burn, and it's creating a nice variance in kind of the diffusion of the color map. So it's slowly getting there, but I thought I'd show you that technique with the mask because it's very useful. If you want, you can use the inverted value, which in this case I think matches the texture a little better, even though I do want kind of an opposite effect. So what I might end up doing is just taking this duplicate layer, or taking the larger brick layer, maybe creating a smaller version of it, maybe just reducing the height of those bricks. I also want to do a little cleanup on the mask for the wall, because some of the brushes I used are showing up too frequently. So I might need to adjust contrast to kind of blend that a little better. One thing I will do with this layer, let me just put the mask on, double click to open the layer style and add an inner shadow, get rid of the distance, and just increase the size. In this way we can add more of a transition between the two maps. We could do a color burn, which is going to give a pretty nice look overall, and just kind of outline that edge throughout the map, which I could invert it to see how that's going to look. Slightly better of a blend now. So if I want to do a drop shadow and affect the other layer, we could do basically the same thing. Sometimes it's good to use a color burn on one say the inner shadow and then a linear burn on the drop shadow, or the other way around, it can produce a pretty varied look and look pretty nice, really depending on the desired amount of dirt in the grit. But with color burn, and we can switch to a linear burn. I think the color burn is going to end up working a little better in this case. So with the larger bricks being kind of the more dominant map right now, I am going to create a duplicate of that layer. Control T to free transform and scale it down to basically the halfway point. And then V on the keyboard for move, and Alt and Shift to create the duplicate. Bring it over to the side, and then Control E to merge down. And it looks like maybe I didn't have them connected. Snap to the right spot. So we'll just bring that back. And I'm going to set this to darker color, which is just going to bring out those separations between the bricks and the lines. And we could either modify this layer, adjusting the opacity, and then maybe running a filter over it to add some variance. But one thing we could do is Control T for free transform, right click, and go to flip vertical, and basically to run it in the other direction. And then we would need to also scale it, and then after scaling we would need to adjust it so that the bottom isn't going to be a harsh cutoff. But I do have the smaller brick layer as a separation, basically where that base is going to be starting. And then if you want, you could run it at full opacity to have lots of smaller bricks. So that's a cool way to really increase the realism of the map. A really important part of creating the color map is the variance of color. And before, the map was looking very dull and very much the same color. So there are a couple of things you can do to really improve the variation of color and make it look a lot better. And what I've done for a lot of the maps is create a duplicate, as you can see with the main wall texture. Create a duplicate of the layer, and went ahead and just deleted the layer mask. What we can do is turn off the layer styles and go up to image adjustments and use the photo filter. What we can do is set up a different variation of the color, and then add in a mask. And I'll just go ahead and paint black, reverse that, and then so in other words, use the paint bucket tool to paint all the way black, and then use the white paintbrush to paint in the mask. Now if you want it to be exactly the same as the other one, you would need to use the same mask and just modify it. So just create a duplicate and then replace the other mask, and now we can switch to black and then just subtract. So this way we can end up with a nice color variation, so it's not all a bland color overall. And you can do that for basically any layer, and it's really a good idea to do it pretty much everything. Depending on the size of the file or the building you're working on, it can become more difficult because you're working with too many layers then. So what you can do is wait until the final color map is done, and then create copies of it, modify the overall color of the entire map, and then set up masks that way. But that way we can add a little more color to the existing colors to add a nice variance. and then also adjust levels of the mask itself to make it blend a little bit better. A lot of different ways we could take care of that. We'll want to do the same thing with the windows, which I'll be doing as kind of a final step after the color map's finished, and that way it doesn't look like exactly the same window. So I just thought that was an important note to make, because that can really help create something more realistic. Because otherwise, if you have something that's just really the same overall color throughout, it's not going to look very realistic. One thing you could also do is any of the layers you've created duplicates for to create variations is even just using the hue and saturation or vibrance filter. So Control U will open hue and saturation. What I'm going to do is just increase the saturation amount of this layer, and this is going to be the brick, the kind of the larger mix. And what you could do is just modify the hue a little bit, increase saturation, just to add a little more color difference between the other map. So lots of little stuff overall you can do.